in light of all the turmoil that is going on in the financial front across the country. And we want to welcome in our guest this afternoon. It is Carl Bonham. He's the Executive Director of the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization, or more commonly known as UHERO. He was a founding member of the organization. This was back in 1997. I don't want to make you feel old, Carl, but 28 years ago. He's also a professor of economics at the University of Hawaii. Mr. Bonham, first off, thank you for joining us in the studio this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Let's just dive right in, if you don't mind. Let's get started. We throw about the word recession. We do that a lot lately, especially. What exactly is a recession?
So there's sort of the textbook definition, which is just a decline in the total output of an economy. But that's not the way that economists actually think about it. That's just the way they teach it. But basically it means broad sectors of the economy sort of moving together from falling consumption, falling number of jobs, generally falling inflation. So it's the way we would describe it is a co-movement of all of these different indicators of the overall economy that tells you, broadly speaking, that the economy has turned down and is actually shrinking.
Is it?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Yeah. No, it's definitely not. I mean, actually, you could argue that at the end of 2024, the U.S. economy was in the best position it had been in 30, 40 years. I mean, we had full employment, very, very strong job creation throughout all of 2024. We created over 160,000 jobs every single month on average in 2024. Inflation had come down. The only thing you could really point to as sort of not that great was the fact that prices were still high, sure. Right? They weren't growing as fast as they used to, but broadly speaking, a very strong economy. So no, we are not in a recession at this moment.
Now we talk about 2025. We have a new administration with President Trump back in office for a second term. We've heard a lot about tariffs. What kind of an impact might they have on Hawaii's economy?
So we started writing about this in our forecast report in the fourth quarter. So the first report that we did after the election, we had to sort of sort through all of the campaign promises and make a whole set of assumptions because you really don't know what the policy will be at any given moment. Now we're beginning to see those policies come into effect. When we first wrote about it, we basically said this meant slower economic growth, higher inflation, and now we're just seeing that ramped up, right, with even broader tariffs and larger tariffs thrown in the mix than we had originally anticipated. So the 25% on steel and aluminum and 25% on anything that's not consistent with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. And all of that translates into, broadly speaking, higher prices.
Yep.
And slower economic growth.
I got to ask you, as a lifelong economist, you have seen a number of different administrations. But have you had to wake up on a daily basis and be like, wait a second, where are we right now? Because it's been this ping pong back and forth where you've had Canada say, okay, you know what, if you're going to do that, we're going to do this. And it seems like you have to really keep up to the minute, if you will, with what's happening tariff-wise. Is that one of the crazier things you've seen over the past 20, 30 years?
I mean, it's the on-again, off-again nature of the tariffs, obviously, the administration, I think, would argue that this is negotiation, and even if that's the case, it creates enough uncertainty, right? That when you're a business owner or a consumer and you're trying to decide, do I invest in a plant that makes things in the United States, but it relies on imported steel or aluminum, or it relies on imported produce from Mexico. And you don't know from day to day if the tariff is 0, 5%, 10%, or 25%, or maybe even 50%, as has been threatened at times, then you don't make those decisions, right? You sit and wait. And so, no, we haven't seen this, not in my lifetime. The closest thing to the sort of level of uncertainty that we're dealing with is probably the depths of the financial crisis, 08, 09, but it wasn't because an administration was making these decisions. It was because of all the other complexities associated with collapsing home values and stock market and things like that.
I was going to say, let's go back about 17 years to 2008. What were some of the things? Because a lot of people, I do remember this. I remember hearing a lot about housing. A lot of people owned homes and they owed a lot more than what the home was worth. Underwater, upside down, what was the terminology exactly? What did drive that?
Yeah, so those were challenges in the U.S. economy that ultimately many of them were caused by policy many years earlier that essentially set up a whole string of lending that essentially allowed people to buy properties that they possibly couldn't afford, and then when these things began to unwind and prices started to fall, then people became upside down on their mortgages or underwater, meaning that the value of the property was less than the value of their loan, right? So they owed more than they could sell the property for. And then, as you could imagine, you're in that situation, you stop spending money, right? Because you've got to keep paying your mortgage and maybe you've lost your job, and it sort of starts to spiral on itself. It feeds on itself and create, but that was the kinds of disruptions in the economy that don't really exist today. Or we don't have these imbalances where we've made a whole bunch of really bad loans, right? We don't have a whole bunch of debt overhanging. So corporations and consumers have not taken on enormous amounts of debt that they won't be able to repay. Instead, this turmoil is being caused specifically by policies coming out of the administration.
If things get expensive, if we do indeed sort of head towards recession, tourism. Obviously, tourism is our big economic driver, right, for the state of Hawaii. If people have to watch what they're spending, will they travel less? Is that one of the first things that gets cut?
I mean, people will. So, and actually, one of the things that we've been seeing a lot of over the last week is the stock market gyrations, right? So we've seen roughly $6 trillion in stock market wealth go away, and when that wealth goes away, people who had stock investments sort of no longer see their portfolios going up, and they start thinking, oh, well, I have to save more, right? I have to offset that, and I don't feel as comfortable spending. And one of the things they don't feel comfortable spending on are big ticket items, right? And big ticket items, cars, TVs, appliances, vacations, things that are sort of not exactly necessities. And so they cut back on that. And so there's definitely a risk of. And in our forecast, we forecast that tourism would begin to decline in the second half of 2025, and that 2026 and 2027 would be down years for tourism.
And that's not good. Not good for Hawaii because we really have. I mean, it's kind of funny, and it's not really. We've talked about the price of eggs. When you talk about eggs, we kind of have them all in one basket when it comes to our economy. Do we not? I mean,
and actually, not only do we have. It's not quite all in one basket, but it's all in a basket and a half. I mean, there's basically federal spending in the islands, which the vast majority of which is DoD spending, and doesn't appear at great risk right now. And then you've got tourism, and then more dynamic, but a big piece of the economy over the last couple of years has been construction. And so, in our forecast, we have no tourism growth for the next several years. We actually have no job growth for the next several years, partly because of the federal layoffs and cutbacks of federal spending. And now, unfortunately, construction is also at risk, primarily from rising costs, right? So if those 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum stay in place, and tariffs on lumber, which is primarily a Canadian product, those create not only uncertainty for builders as to what their costs will be, but it makes it so that projects will be harder to pencil out, meaning they won't make money, and then those projects get put on hold if they're in the planning stage. So maybe things that would have been planned for next year get delayed.
I was going to say, we see an awful lot of cranes if you look around Kaka'ako, and then you drive up to, say, Mililani, you see Koa Ridge. Things like that are already on the way, that are already sort of midstream. They're not going to stop, right?
I mean, it has happened before, but it's highly unlikely that say, a Kaka'ako Tower or along Ala Moana would stop. Things would have to get very bad for that to happen. And in contrast, you look at Koa Ridge or Ho'opili, they build in smaller increments, right? So you might plan out 40 townhomes or 40 single-family homes, and you pull the permits and you start to build them, so they can slow down, right? They can, if lumber prices go up and stay high and interest rates stay high and consumer spending retrenches, they can just slow down their workflow.
Sure. You touched on it a little bit with the stock market and the fact that it has been so topsy-turvy, down 600 points, up at times several hundred points. Are there things that people can do to minimize risk or like you said, they get worried. They see that, they know, okay, I know if the stock market goes down 600 points, I know that my 401k is hurting.
Yeah. So, the obvious thing you do in investment portfolios is diversify, right? So, I looked at my investment portfolio yesterday, and it's not down nearly as much as the stock market indexes because it's diversified, because it's got investments that are bonds and international investments. So it's not moving in lockstep with these big gyrations in say the S&P 500. And then the other thing is you think hard about your objectives and you stick to your plan, and you make adjustments elsewhere. And it really, there's going to be wide differences across our community as to who's being impacted hard and who's not. So if you're a researcher at the university whose grant just got terminated, or you're a student working on a research project at the university and the grant was terminated by National Institutes of Health or whoever, you're going to be hit much, directly. And those people are already planning, right? They're already adjusting their consumption down and trying to stabilize their situation. And then those are the actions that actually feed back into the overall economy and bring the overall economy down because people are cutting back.
You touched on it a little bit. Do you think the federal cuts to things like VA and stuff, do you think that will have an impact in Hawaii? Because
Absolutely.
I do know we're pretty heavy, we're pretty top heavy when it comes to states, right?
So we are in terms of total federal spending, but if you look at where that federal spending is, it is primarily in DOD. And at least so far, there haven't been any clear announcements of losses in federal civilian employment that is supporting Air Force, Army, and Navy, for example. Yeah. In our last forecast report, we estimated that 2,200 federal civilian workers would lose jobs in the state. But then just last week, a judge put those on hold and actually told the administration they needed to hire these people back because they weren't following the rules. And so this just fits right in with all the other chaos, right? One day someone loses a job, the next day they get rehired, the next day they lose the job again, and and all those federal workers, and there's a lot of them, but they're looking at this and they're cutting back spending. Actually, an example of this is in the D.C. area, and not just D.C. but the surrounding area, initial claims for unemployment insurance have shot up, and these are civilian jobs. Right, so these are people who maybe were working on contracts related to federal government spending, and we haven't seen that in Hawaii yet, and we haven't seen it nationally, but you are seeing it in that heavily federal spending focused area of the country.
I ask you to put on your future-looking goggles there. Where do we go from here? Do you see it improving, getting worse? Are you cautionary? I guess I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to pick your brain as to where we stand if we came back here in 6 months to do this again. What are we going to be talking about?
It's a great question, and frankly, I don't think anybody knows because we really don't have any way of knowing what the next step is in policy. Right, so we don't know how the budget debates are going to work out in Congress, whether we're going to see big cuts in things like Medicaid or other social programs or funding for social programs. We don't know what the situation will be on tariffs. I have a view on that. I suspect that, so there have been announcements. Actually, on the first day of the new Trump administration, the president signed an executive order that mandated these studies of tariffs across the entire globe, and we're supposed to get those studies on April 1, and on April 2, we're supposed to see announcements on the new tariff policy, which it's called reciprocal tariffs, which basically means if country A has a tariff on our goods, we're going to have the same tariff on theirs. If we go there, that's a significant ratchet up in the tariffs, even beyond what we already have. Yeah. I think that's where we're headed, and that worries me. That will have negative implications But frankly, we don't know if it's real, whether it will actually happen or if it'll come off the next day.
Have you seen something like this? I mean, we talk about 2008, but that was something completely different. This is really new territory.
No,
right?
it really is. Right, and actually, if we went to the reciprocal tariff route, the estimates that we've seen of what the tariffs would look like would put us back to 1937 levels of tariffs. Right, we are really talking about new territory in the modern world.
I was going to say, we started this whole thing by making you feel old, that UHERO was 28 years old, but now we're talking about 78, 88 years ago. We're talking about last century.
Well, what we're dealing
stuff.
with right now makes me feel old.
Well, it's kind of frightening. I guess just as even if I said, okay, take your economist hat off, are you worried just as a resident of Hawaii? Are you worried about what lies ahead financially?
I mean, I do worry, particularly about the most vulnerable households, right? Because the people who get hurt the worst when we go through these kinds of events. So tariffs are a regressive tax. So if we end up with across-the-board tariffs, the people who are going to be paying the largest percentage of their income on what are taxes, right? These are taxes on imported goods, are going to be the lowest income households. And the areas of support that come from the federal government that are most likely to get cut, things like Medicaid, SNAP benefits, aid for families. That's what I worry about. The good news is that the state is in a reasonably good position with significant rainy day fund reserves. We can weather some of this, and we may not have to wait 4 years for policy to change, because if things get bad enough fast enough, control of Congress could very well change in the midterms.
And I was going to say, is it possible to make too much out of this?
Yes,
like almost
yes.
like you kind of yelling fire in an
No, absolutely.
in a theater, crowded theater.
You do have to be careful because it is so chaotic, right? And everybody. I mean, I have no idea how many news stories there have been on tariffs in the last 2 weeks.
A lot.
Right, and so you kind of get overwhelmed. There's sort of an information overload, and the vast majority of the information is, it's not positive. And so, yes, you do need to be careful because you can sort of drive yourself right into depression, and then you stop spending, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Carl Bonham, thank you. We appreciate you joining us today. We really do. It was very enlightening, and we thank you so much for being here with us. And we want to thank not just Carl Bonham, but also thank you for dealing with us and for sitting here and watching this exclusive digital special. Are we heading towards a recession? We will continue to bring you presentations like this on our website and on our YouTube channel, and you will find a recorded version of the show on our YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in, and have yourself a great rest of your day. Aloha.